again welcome you to the second annual Wake County Bar Association Foundation Scholarship Gala. Mouthful if I've ever heard one. We're delighted to have such a large and distinguished group and hope that you all enjoy your evening. This is a fundraising group event for the Wake County Bar Association Foundation Scholarship Fund. This fund began with the request by the family of Judge Ed Preston that gifts in his memory be made to the fund to establish a scholarship for a deserving student from Wake County at one of our area law schools. Lawyers who have benefited from this scholarship practice in our community today. They attest to its value. Among them is the chair of our endowment committee, Bill Bostrinsky, who's sitting back there. Thank you, Bill. This is an important and valuable program which can only grow in value to the recipients. In addition to recognizing Bill and the recipients of this scholarship, I'd like to recognize and thank all of the members of the dinner committee and the endowment committee for their assistance in making this dinner a success. I'm not going to call any names because it's a lot of them, and I probably would skip somebody anyway. But I'd particularly like to recognize and thank Alice Roman, Catherine Haney, and Aretha Day of the Wake County Bar Association staff for their continuing cheerful help. It's something that I don't think they ever thought they'd have to do when they took those positions. Last year, our initial dinner, which featured the Honorable Joseph Blount Cheshire Jr. as honoree, was so successful that we decided to do it again. It's not a requirement that you have Blount in your name to be a nominee, an honoree. The format is simple. Our invited speakers have free rein. They are enjoined to be entertaining and personal in their comments about the honoree. Upon completion of their presentations, Jim's going to have an opportunity to, what do you call it, rejoin? To rebut, respond, whatever you want to say. Bonnie Wire, the immediate past president of the Wake County Bar Association, will be the moderator for these festivities. Bonnie has been a great supporter of the scholarship fund and has been particularly good at writing 20 letters to a lot of the firms in this town about why they have not subscribed for a table. But they're all here tonight. Thank you so much. Bonnie, it's all yours.
Thank you, Al. I am thrilled to see so many of you here this evening. What a wonderful tribute this is to Jim Blount. You know, when Al Currington and I had lunch, I guess it was last December, and we had lunch with Jim, and we asked him if he would lend his name to the scholarship dinner to help us raise money for the endowment. The very first words out of his mouth were, "Nobody will show up." That obviously didn't happen, Jim, but I'll tell you, the 9 Smith Anderson tables, they were a hard sell. We have a wonderful program this evening, and I am truly honored to be introducing a great panel of speakers, and I'm going to move along right with our program right now without further ado. Our first speaker is connected to Jim in multiple ways. He is not only one of Jim's current law partners at Smith Anderson, he also grew up in Jim's hometown of Wilson, North Carolina. In fact, I understand that the Blount family and the Thompson family had adjoining backyards in Wilson. I am, of course, referring to the one and the only Sammy Thompson. As I got ready tonight, I was trying to come up with a single adjective to best describe Sammy to those of you who don't know him well. I know that there are members of the plaintiffs' bar here with us tonight who have their own set of adjectives. Although I doubt any of them are repeatable here tonight. The word that I came up with is tenacious, which the dictionary defines as, quote, stubbornly unyielding and doggedly persistent, unquote. And that is a very, very good description of Sammy. I'm not sure I have ever known a lawyer who has championed the causes of his clients with such grit and resolve as Sammy Thompson. Sammy is a graduate of UNC, both undergraduate and law school, and has practiced with Smith Anderson since 1971, primarily representing physicians in malpractice cases. although I understand he has recently branched out into aviation law. He is here tonight with his wife Bonnie, whose name I never have any trouble remembering. Please join me in welcoming Sammy Thompson.
Good evening. We have a new definition in Wake County of contributory negligence as a matter of law. We have distinguished members of the judiciary here. Let it be said from this night forward, contributory negligence as a matter of law is having Sammy Thompson lead off the roast for Jim Blount. I'm going to start with a blunt kind of story. This is not a story I got from Blount, but it's the kind of story that if Blount were up here first, he would be telling you. It seems that Bill Clinton and the Pope died simultaneously. And there was an enormous screw up in heaven, and Bill went up, and the Pope went down. And it took them 48 hours to clear up the snafu. As they passed each other as the Pope was ascending and Bill was descending, and they greeted each other, the Pope said, "You know, Mr. President, I have just been so looking forward to it, and I'm so excited about getting to heaven and meeting the Virgin Mary." And Bill said, "Too late." My thoughts about Jim Blount are divided into two categories. There is the BL and the AL. The BL is before Linda, and Linda is this nice person right here. The AL obviously is after Linda. We're talking about two different animals here, folks. And I knew the one that was BL. The BL Blount hung out at the Beckenna Apartments, not a beautiful home on York Road. The BL Blount ate at Poole's Diner, not the Magnolia Grill. The BL Blount cooked hamburgers on a hibachi, not gourmet feasts from a state-of-the-art kitchen. The BL Blount drank enormous quantities of cold duck. Not fine wine. His idea of music, the BL Blount, was an 8-track with Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy. I hope not many of you have heard them. Unfortunately, he played them for me one night. Versus after Linda. He's a symphony man. The BL Blount, and I emphasize the BL with this, had an eye for the ladies. I can remember one of our young and naive associates approaching me saying, "I'm worried to death about Blount. Shouldn't we get him a date or something?" I pulled him aside and I said, "My boy, don't worry about Blount. The man's going to be okay. You don't need to line him up." Jim Blount always, when I was learning how to try cases with him, seemed to wind up with a good-looking woman on the jury. And finally, after a few trials, I tried to glean the strategy. I said, "Jim, how don't ever take a good-looking woman off the jury. I mean, what's the strategy? What are you doing? He said, well, it just makes trying a case a hell of a lot more fun. Jim Blount was the original communicator with female jurors. He made eyes, and he made grimaces, and he made smiles, and he communicated extremely effectively with female jurors. He was doing that long before Johnny Edwards turned it into an art form. After one 3-week trial involving construction law and the intricate details of how you build buildings, one attractive female juror that he had left on the jury came up after the trial and said, Mr. Blount, you ain't gonna believe what I thought a stud was before this case. Now, many of you plaintiffs' lawyers have the misconception that Jim Blount's a tough negotiator. The truth is, he's a pussycat. Jim Blount left Rockingham after 17 years of practicing law and came to work with Smith Anderson in 1970. He negotiated with Jim Dorsett the elder concerning his arrival in Raleigh with Smith Anderson. Jim Blount started work with Smith Anderson not knowing whether he was a partner or an associate. And he didn't know how much he was going to be making. He has certainly always been a workhorse, however. Jim Blount carried the largest caseload of any lawyer that I ever knew. On top of that, in December of 1971, Willis Smith was tragically killed in an airplane crash, and Jim took over his caseload, which was enormous. The following January, less than a month away, George Ragsdale left the firm and he took over his caseload. He could work harder than anybody I ever knew. Now, in addition to all of those cases, he, along with Robin Henson, a speaker you'll hear from later, taught the bar review course. And as I years gone around the state and met lawyers, always asked me about my partner, Jim Blount. Isn't he the guy that taught the bar review course? I said, yeah. He said, man, I tell you what, he was the guy that always had the jokes. With all due respect to Robin Henson, the bar review course is one of the most boring, dullest things you ever took on, Robin. And as bright as you are, and as good as you are, it was hard to deal with. Blount at least told jokes, right? Barely, Robin. Of course, none of Blount's jokes that he told during the bar review course were politically correct. He could have never told any of his stories once political correctness came in fashion. I've often wondered if political correctness wasn't a reaction to Blount's jokes. Jim Blount hates boring. He just don't like boring. Jim Blount made the mistake of getting me involved in the International Association of Defense. They had black tie affairs, Greenbrier. With Jim Blount, and we were enduring a very boring presentation by the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Warren Burger. Any of you who heard Warren Burger know exactly what I'm talking about. Well, at the conclusion of his talk, Blount and I just had about all we could stand, and I enticed him to slip under the table with me in his black tie and let's have a drink. He did. United States. Jim and I met his shoes that night. Now I know we've got a lot of plaintiffs' lawyers here that are mighty proud of their $1 million settlements. But let it be said, the first lawyer in Wake County to get $1 million settlement was a defense lawyer, Jim Blount. We tried the case involving the skin on the building at Burroughs Welcome that was coming off every time it rained. And after the settlement, Jim, as was his way, wanted to celebrate. And he wanted to celebrate, and as was his way, he wanted all the lawyers involved in the case, all sides of the case, and everybody involved in it to celebrate. And he invited everybody involved, which was about 30 people, over to the Carolina Country Club for Bloody Marys and brunch immediately following that settlement. That was the Blount style. Celebrating was and is extremely important to him. Holiday to Jim Blount. Jim Blount was the first person to ever bring a Christmas tree into the Smith Anderson law firm. He did that religiously from 1970 to the present. I've often wondered what in the world Smith Anderson did between 1913 and 1970 without Jim Blount to bring in the Christmas tree. He also loved Halloween. And one of his favorite decorations for Halloween was an enlarged photograph of Marie Sides from the Durham Bar. Any of you that remember Marie Sides will know well she didn't need enlarging. One of Jim's greatest qualities has been calmness. He's always calm. I like to think of Jim Blount and John Anderson as sort of bookends to calmness and hyperactivity. John had ADD before anybody knew what it was. John used to drive Jim nuts. Jim used to say, John, God bless him, didn't have ulcers, but he was a carrier. Jim was trying a case over before Judge Dupree, and Jim was enduring a line of questions by the plaintiff's lawyers that were rude, crude, obnoxious, and irrelevant, immaterial, and shouldn't have been asked in the first place, and got a continuing objection from Judge Dupree. John Anderson came in after that had occurred, sat outside the bar rail for about 3 questions, leaped the bar rail, came up behind Jim Blount and said, "Object!" To which Jim almost had a heart attack. As Jim's career progressed, he developed hardness of hearing. I say he developed hardness of hearing. He always took full advantage of it. When he was selecting a jury, he would alert them to the fact that I may not hear your answer, so I may have to ask you to repeat it. Of course, all of that was bull. He was just setting it up so that whenever a witness said something that was good for the defense, he'd say, "I didn't hear that. Would you say that again?" Of course, he never heard anything that he didn't want to hear. And frankly, I would have talked back to him a hell of a lot more if I could have ever figured out which was the bad ear. A lawyer's a lawyer and a mentor for sure. That's Jim Blount. The lessons he taught me: how to try a lawsuit, how to prepare a lawsuit in one weekend. Jim was never accused of over-preparing a case. He somehow just knew what was important and what wasn't. He also taught me the concept of long-range planning, meaning, which courtroom are we in Monday, Sammy? Lessons he taught me and lessons I didn't learn: organization, being friendly with your opposition and remaining friends throughout a tough trial. Blount is the best there ever was at that, and I salute him for it. And I acknowledge my inability to emulate him. Blount never met a stranger and certainly never met an enemy. And the worst thing I ever heard him say about a lawyer on the other side of the case was about a fellow named Martin Dixon. Martin Dixon looked and acted like a Nazi stormtrooper. He was an insufferable bastard. And he was very, very, very difficult. And after a very, very difficult day with Martin Dixon, Jim and I were walking back to the office, and Jim turned to me and said the worst thing I ever heard him say about a lawyer. He said, "You know, that fellow's hard to like." Another lesson he taught and I didn't learn was win, lose, or draw, you're back at work the next morning early. Fact is, I never learned to be at work early any day. And the thing I wish I could have learned was the rock steady consistency of Jim Blount. Somehow, and most of you have experienced this in this room, when Jim Blount puts out that great big paw and shakes your hand, you know everything's just somehow going to be all right. The greatest lesson that Jim Blount has provided to us at Smith Anderson is that good or bad, thick or thin, you always stay together. You stick together. And so it is with great joy that I salute our mentor, our friend, and our partner, Jim Blount.
Our next speaker is someone particularly special to me. So special, in fact, that I wrote an article about him in the Wake County Bar Flyer last year. Here's what I wrote about him. He is eccentric, idiosyncratic, unpredictable, creative, very temperamental, and totally non-conforming. And to tell you the truth, none of us up here has a clue what he's going to say tonight, and I'm scared to ask. I also wrote in my article that he was one of the most honorable and brilliant lawyers that I've ever worked with. Now, with all those adjectives, I could only be referring to one person, and that's my former law partner, Jerry Alvis. Jerry is a native of West Virginia, and he attended UNC for both his undergraduate and law school degrees. He began his practice with Frank Dupree in the law firm of Dupree, Weaver, Horton, Kaufman, and Alvis. Later served as a Superior Court judge from 1974 to 1976. When he left the bench, he joined Young, Moore, Henderson, and Alvis, and that's where I met him. He currently practices with the firm of Womble Carlisle. We are delighted to have Jerry and his wife Nona with us this evening. I understand that Jerry and Jim Blount actually became friends when Jerry began dating Nona. Nona was living at McKenna Apartments on the same floor as Jim Blount. And suddenly, Jerry began hanging around McKenna Apartments. In the years since, Jerry and Jim have tried a number of cases together, and they've remained very good friends. Please join me in welcoming Jerry Alvis.
Oh God, he says.
You know, I'm here by virtue of the arrogance of the committee to roast James. They've insisted that I speak despite the fact that I've protested that I do not know one roast-worthy thing to say about him. And in younger days, I would have had war with them, but I found out through the years that they make whiny prisoners and tacky corpse, especially Walter. And so I just gave in, and so here I am. I want to tell you that I am absolutely amazed at how many people are here. You and I know that you don't have half this many friends. And so you got to figure what the others are. And so pay attention. This may be the way it is, you know. Jim's been one of my wary friends for many years, wary of what I might say or what I might do. And yesterday he sent me an email, and I got to share it with you. I won't share all of it with you, not the part where he asked to talk about how tall he was then. He says, Al Purrington told me recently that you're going to be one of the speaker's roasters tomorrow night, and I skipped some stuff. As you think back on some of our times together and plan your comments, don't overlook the fact that my 93-year-old mother and Linda's and mine children will all be there. Now is that a yep mail or not? I'm telling you, old sad and insane himself is not that wimpy. Anyway, I sent back the message, and I hope you got it. And this is what he's sweating. I said, I can't help it. I'm telling the penguin joke anyway. You know, oh, good, we're going to do the penguin joke. No, I wouldn't do that to you, but it's the best joke I ever heard, and he told it to me. Maybe afterwards I'll tell it to you. I first met Jim when he arrived in Raleigh early in this century, and we've sort of been friends from that beginning. But in trying to come up with something to say tonight, because I really didn't know anything to say that would roast him, I realized that his before Raleigh life was largely unknown to me, and so I decided to do some research, and I made some notes here. Among the interesting things I discovered in grade school, Jim was so fat that you could read the message on his favorite t-shirt without you having to move, despite the fact that it was in large block letters, all on a single line. It said, C5 States from Lookout Mountain. Pretty fat, buddy. And I understand that in high school, as a high school junior, he was a power on the football team. He played in the line both ways. His nickname was Plum Dumb Blount. That year, he sacked his own team's quarterback twice. And after the last game of that season, he had a bad fall in the shower, and he sustained serious head injury, and thereafter he was very intelligent, graduating with honors, presenting the valedictorian address at graduation. This is the Jim we know post-football. Then, after being superbly educated at UNC, even including a few courses in law, he tried to practice in Rockingham. As best I can determine through my investigation, he was not successful there because the bar could never come to trust a man who subscribed to the Wall Street Journal on a daily basis. Well, I wish I could share with you some of mine and Jim's high adventures. But with his mother here, Mrs. Blount, and all, it just wouldn't work. And I know you wouldn't believe anything I would say anyway, Mrs. Blount. We used to double date on occasion, and Jim had interesting friends. One I remember well was Dr. Carl, last name withheld to protect me. Dr. Carl was one of the early artists in feminine upper body improvement. And he often took us to the local art shops to see his work. My Apartment and the Keg, to name a couple. You remember Carl, don't you? He was the best guy we ever run around with. sometimes friendships perpetuate accidents, and our mutual friend Bob Clay and I almost did Jim in one time through an act that we thought was total kindness. He was in the old Rex Hospital for a rear seal repair. And Bob and I smuggled in a lot of very high-octane gin and fresh orange juice. I'm sure his sons will remember my famous jacket, the one where when we went out shooting and so on, I could carry a whole case of Rolling Rock beer on the inside pockets, and nobody could tell. That was the jacket I wore over there that night. And we had a tremendously successful party. And the next day, Clay called and says, "Dang, did you hear what happened to Jim?" And I said, "No." And he says he's in intensive care. He says his blood is thinned out, he's hemorrhaging. And boy, we squeaked through that. They're still doing research over there. Very curious as to how his blood thinned out like that. It was never, the etiology of it was never diagnosed, much to mine and Clay's relief. Well, Jim and I are a couple of guys who are real easy and have a rare pleasure in our advancing ages. It is something we share, and it's so great. We no longer have to worry that something may screw up most of our lives. No. Our wills are now important documents, we realize. And, anytime we get tired of this, we can throw ourselves on the richness of Social Security. Thank you. And until recently, we thought we could smile at all the young women that we wanted to with impunity. But about last November, Linda called me, and she was in a state of mixed disbelief and distraughtness. A friend of theirs who owns a drugstore here in town where they'd shopped for years had called her and told her that Jim had poured denture cleanser all over the cashier and stormed out of the place. And I thought, they're trying to pull some joke on me. This can't be so. But she says, the manager says that the girl is threatening to call the police. And I said, well, God, we can't have nobody call the police on Jim. And so I called the guy up, and I get the same story. And I sure didn't want the police to get involved. So the guy and I start talking about some immediate alternative management of this problem. And later I learned what happened. Jim gone in there, and like he does about once a month, he goes in and buys a whole lot of supplies, and he brought them up there to the counter. And the young woman was brand new as a cashier, and she was very proud of the job, and she rang up all this stuff, and he handed her his money, and she gave him back his money, and he said he gave me back too much money. And she said, I did not. He said, you did. And so they did an audit right there. And it turned out that what happened was she'd given him a 10% senior discount. And he said, I didn't ask for any damn senior discount. And she says, well, you're entitled to one anyway. And he says, well, how do you know I'm entitled? She said, well, you get real. And so at that point, I understand that something happened with the denture cleanser, and we got to miss. So anyway, thank our guardian angels for the continuing developments in the law, and we got mediation, right? And so we get this in mediation, and I want to tell you, it's been very successful. Now, a couple of times a month, Jim goes in the store and he gathers up some things that either by law or by store policy only adults can buy. He takes them up to this young woman and he puts them out there. And she says, sir, only adults can buy these things. He says, I am an adult. She says, I want to see some proof. He says, I left my ID at home. She takes all the stuff off the counter, puts it under the counter, and says, come back when you have some ID. He tips her $10 and leaves. It's a great thing. They're both quite happy about it. Age, of course, can be enjoyable, but it can also be a concern. And I figured out that as of tonight, Jim is 25,970 days old. That's a lot of days, boy. I don't know, 25,974, that's right. Well, I don't know what we make of that, but I guess it would be okay for lawyers to draw an inference that he crosses the road better than your average possum. And incidentally, about the denture clincher, I want to fess up, we'll go to the same doc, you know. Linda and I are sort of close to it. Guy doesn't need a denture clincher. In fact, we figured out a long time ago that if you get our age and you got most of your hair and most of your teeth and a functioning rear seal, you're winning. Well, but Linda, in view of his age, and she's so caring for this man, and he's the light of her life, and she wants to take care of him, and I can understand that. And so she's been sewing a little label in his clothes that reads, "My name is Jim Blount, Jr. I live at 28 York Road, Raleigh, North Carolina. My wife's name is Linda, and her telephone number is 787-0473. If found lost, please return me. Small reward possible depending upon condition." Well, before we came into the formal session this evening, I spent a few minutes with my old friend, and we were looking out over this great group, and we were remarking on how amazing it is that the younger people, each generation, look so much more distinguished, and how our old friends are aging so well. And I made the comments about how great it is that the wives of our contemporaries look so grand, and how those wives dress so beautifully, and how perfectly elegant they are in their manners, and how clever their conversation. And he agreed with me. He said, "Hey, yes, indeed. That's certainly true. I couldn't have said it any better." And so we stood there in the silence of our seniority for a couple of minutes. He leaned over and he said, "Jerry, tell me again, which ones are the wives?" Well, enough of this truth time. Jim Blount's smile has warmed my spirits for nearly 30 years. His food, he's a master chef, you know, and drink and nourish me. His friendship has been a constant in my life, as reliable as the rotation of daylight and darkness. His exceptional intelligence is always on loan without interest or even expectation of repayment. His professionalism is a bar set and kept high. His integrity is. His friendship is one of my treasures. He's what my old mentor and Jim's admirer, Frank Dupree, called a big man, and that has absolutely nothing to do with size. I'm not much on giving younger people advice, a thing for which my younger friends, including my sons, constantly thank me. But for those of you present this evening, here's a man who, in my opinion, is an excellent role model for those of us who would aspire to be the best of this profession and the best of this humanity. Jim, I've fallen upon teaching myself Spanish, and here's my first public effort. Usted es mi amigo viejo, y yo amo usted. Thank all of you. None of you will let me go home with you. I'll quit.
It was appropriate that I mention this since Jim and our next speaker, Dr. Barton Davidian, have taken numerous duck hunting trips together over the past 10 years to Maine, to Idaho, to Washington State, even to such exotic duck hunting locales as Mexico and Argentina. For those of you who don't know him, Dr. Davidian practices medicine here in Raleigh and specializes in plastic and reconstructive surgery. He did his undergraduate work in medical school at UNC. He also did his internship at UNC and his residency at UNC, True Target. Among his other accomplishments, he has served as the president of the Wake County Medical Society, the president of the North Carolina Society of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgeons, and the president of the medical staff at Raleigh Community Hospital. Dr. Davidian and his wife Diane have been close friends for many years with Jim and Linda, and we are honored to have them here this evening. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Barton Davidian.
I know how Jim Bowie must have felt at the Alamo. Members of the Wake County Bar Association and distinguished guests, it's been my great pleasure to participate in the cussing, discussing, roasting, and toasting of Jim Blount. As some of you all may already know, Jim and I go back a long, long time, and I've got some proof. Unlike what you've been told. Jim was not 4 feet wide and 2 feet tall. He was basically a Tarzan look-alike, and I first met Jim when we were at a wildfowl camp, a wilderness camp, not wildfowl, I got ducks on the brain tonight. A wilderness camp near Weaverville, North Carolina called Sequoia. This was directed by C. Walton Johnson, who we all, for obvious reasons, called Chief. During the first encounter, Jim was the water safety instructor, and his dubious honor was to teach the campers how to swim, dive, and canoe with relative safety. His companion in this endeavor, Buddy Crone, was from Goldsboro, and he was also an AAU diving champion. These two would frequently demonstrate how safe it was to dive from the high diving board. This entailed Jim on Buddy Crone's shoulders with a flaming torch in each hand, diving from the high board into pitch blackness of night in front of groups of campers who felt that these men must have had nerves of steel and balls of brass. On into the summer, I was instructed in the relative merits of travel by canoe and how to enter and exit said canoe without dumping oneself and one's companion into the water. These words must have been permanently burned into my cerebral cortex, since after we arrived in Raleigh, Jim and I became friends, and we were invited to be guests of Linda and Jim at their place at Seven Lakes. And we had one of Blount's gourmet meals, which consisted of bass, batter fried, beer batter. It was wonderful. And we were sitting there, stuffed to the gills, and Jim says, "Let's go canoeing." I thought, my belly's full up to my neck, that's the last thing I want to do, we'll go canoeing. So we went down to the dock, and here I hear these same words that I've heard some 30 plus years ago. I use plus so you can leave that to your imagination. About how to enter and exit this canoe without dumping oneself and one's partner into the water. I knew I'd heard those words before, and I just couldn't remember where or when. So we got in the canoe, and we traveling around this lake, and this beautiful night stars are out, and we start to remember. And I finally realized that Jim was then that famous or infamous counselor that I'd had at camp some 30 plus years ago. We got reacquainted at that time. Not much of a roast, but a real good story. And this is a picture that I was able to isolate from. My mother saved everything. I'm evidence of that. This was a picture of Jim with his campers all around. I have got a friend who, through the art of digital something or other, managed to sort Jim out from the rest of the crowd. And this is the Tarzan look-alike that I was referring to. Anybody recognize him? Does he look like Jim? That look like Jim at all? Time went on, and we became fast friends again. And not only did Jim and I become fast friends, but the families became fast friends as well. We took the boys on a hunting trip to Washington State for the first time. And Jim, who had been an avid quail hunter all his life, was about to be introduced to the world of serious duck hunting. He knew right then and there that he didn't have the modern day attire to be properly prepared for the blind in Washington, so forthwith he went to the Kmart, finding on Blue Light Special an exceptional camouflage outfit which was green. On the surface, this outfit appeared to be quite suitable for the occasion. In fact, he looked rather dapper in it. We got up to the Pacific Northwest, and as you might imagine, it was drizzly and damp and cold and all those things that you expect to find in Washington State. We went out for the first day's hunt, and after that, we came in. We were looking forward to a real nice hot shower. We all started peeling off our clothes. Sure enough, Jim took off his clothes and he was still green camouflage. I wish you could have seen it in one. There stands Jim, green from his neck to his knees. Boys then started calling him the Jolly Green Giant. It took about 3 days for that dye to separate itself from Jim. And we had a wonderful time teasing him the whole trip. Also on that same trip, he demonstrated an ability that none of us knew he had, and that was the ability to snore. Never before had we heard such virtuosity. The first night, we were all bedded down, ready for a sleep of sweet dreams of ducks and geese flying around. Jim managed, as always, to go to sleep first. Well, it was then we became acquainted with the sounds of the Jolly Green Giant. I think Bob there was the first one to abandon the ship. He bolted from the room and went to the far end of the cabin, found an empty room with a few cots, accompanied by a few spiders, and crawled in for sleep. Well, it was about 10 minutes after that Woofer abandoned the ship and bailed out, leaving me alone in there with the various insects and other animals that shared the room with us. Well, I finally gave up and went down to the room where the boys were, and we finished the night's sleep a long way from Jim. But it was not until the next morning that we really realized the extent of Jim's abilities. For not only did we abandon the room, but every insect and animal in the room had left. I could, of course, go on and on with story after story after story, because we have shared a lot of trips, a lot of times, and as was already mentioned, we've been to Alaska, Argentina, Mexico, Idaho, all these places to duck hunt. But I think it's appropriate at this point to mention an observation that I've made over many years of knowing Jim. And as a practicing physician in North Carolina, I can, without reservation, say that many of us owe our reputations and our practices to the relentless pursuit of the truth and the courtroom skills of James D. Blount. I know I speak for all of us when we thank him for his years of caring, support. I have never known a group that is associated with Jim, either in the courtroom situation, a fishing expedition, or a hunting trip, who have not benefited from his wisdom, his philosophy of life, and we are all better men for having known him. I, for one, am extremely proud to call him friend. Thank you.
Our last speaker this evening, Robin Hinson, is a native of Rockingham, North Carolina, which is exactly where he first met Jim Blount when Jim began practicing law in Rockingham in 1952. Robin went on to UNC Law School after graduating and spending 3 years on the UNC Law faculty. He returned to Rockingham and into practice with Jim. I understand they were law partners for 8 years before Robin left the firm in 1969 to join CP&L in Raleigh as Associate General Counsel. He later joined Haynes Hosiery in Winston-Salem before becoming Chief Legal Officer for First Union Corporation, which was then Cameron Financial. Ultimately, Robin became a senior partner with the Charlotte law firm of Robinson, Bradshaw, and Hinson, where he continues to practice today. Robin and Jim have remained close personal friends over the years, and we're particularly honored that he has come all the way from Charlotte to roast his longtime friend. Please join me in welcoming Robin Hinson.
Thank you very much. It is indeed a pleasure for an itinerant lawyer from Mecklenburg County to address this esteemed group. You refer to us as the great state of Mecklenburg when you're not using four-letter words. And it is really and truly an honor to be here and to see so many good friends. And particularly on this occasion. Jim and I do go back unbelievably 40 years. I did meet him when he first came to Rockingham. We did practice law together for 8 years, and a 3 and then a 4-man firm. And we taught the bar review course together. Sammy's remarks were quite apropos
in that I had more than one student come up and tell me how much they enjoyed Jim. Without saying a word to me. And we've maintained a close personal association over the years. Fishing, hunting, most recently taking our boys down to Callaway Gardens on a fishing trip. So I've had a difficult time in thinking about the things that I could say about Jim that would be appropriate for this occasion. And I really chose three subjects based on true stories that illustrate qualities of Jim that we all know. So I'll talk about Jim the chef, Jim the sportsman environmentalist, and Jim the lawyer. Now, to talk about Jim the chef takes me back to my first experience with him as a cook. And to introduce that, I have to introduce you to a legendary Rockingham lawyer, Fitzroy Donald Phillips, judge of the Superior Court. I see some of the older heads nodding in appreciation for Judge Phillips, but I'll just tell you a little bit about him. He was quite a distinguished man. He was a Nuremberg judge after the Second World War. He was elected mayor of Rockingham before he returned from the First World War. He was a Superior Court judge after being a prosecutor. A great big man, robust, gray hair, horn-rimmed glasses, a booming voice. In the courtroom, he could be heard over anything. Also, everything that the judge had and everything that the judge did was the best. You ask him what kind of car he drove the big Chevrolet. You ask him about his electric razor, and it was the Norelco, and he would have stole the virtues of the three floating heads and so on. And the judge was also a chef. He was not quite the chef that Jim Blount is, or so I'm told that Jim is. Somebody told me that a person here in Raleigh paid $1,800 to have Jim cook a meal, a gourmet meal for a group of people. And I thought, only in America. But unlike Jim, the judge specialized in home fare. And one of his favorite dishes was rice. And he cooked rice very carefully. When he finished it, he'd show you how every kernel stood apart. And it was moist and tender, perfect in every respect. The judge took great pride in his culinary ability. He arranged a trip down to the Suwannee River to go fishing. Took a group of Rockingham men. Jim was a young lawyer, was very flattered to be invited. Went down for weeks fishing on the banks of the Suwannee. We stayed in an old house that had a long room. The kitchen was at one end, there was a table, and then the seating area. And in the seating area, the judge had his place of honor where he could preside over all of the proceedings. One night, everybody was there having a drink. Jim came in a little late, had his shower, walked in, the judge was holding forth, regaling people, were laughing, carrying on, and Jim walked back in the kitchen, and he lifted the lid of a pot to just look in it and see what was in it, and the judge fell silent, the laughter stopped, and then this booming voice came through the room. Good God Almighty, boy, you've ruined the rice. To my knowledge, that was the last time on that fishing trip that anyone lifted the lid of the pot. The second story is Jim, the the sportsman and the environmentalist, and that requires the introduction of another noted Rockingham person, a person to whom we referred as Dr. Marvelous. Dr. Marvelous was a radiologist, quite a good one. He was very enthusiastic about everything. Everything was marvelous. He had a marvelous vacation. He was reading a marvelous book. He was giving me a sigmoidoscopic examination, and I could hear him saying, "Marvelous." That was oddly comforting and funny. Dr. Marvelous was a man of many parts. He during his morning rituals, he said that he read the Vulgate in Greek. This being Rockingham and no one in Rockingham being versed in Greek, so that could be neither confirmed. Dr. Marvelous built a lake, and he was very meticulous. He cleaned off the land, took out the blackjacks, planted all around the lake, and built a lovely home out there. He had it stocked beautifully, balanced. It was just a prime fishing place. One afternoon, Jim came in my office, one morning he came in my office and said, "You know, Davis and I went out to Dr. Marvelous's pond yesterday, and we caught 8 big brim." He said, "I found the hole." He said, "We're going this afternoon. You get the beer, and I'll get the crickets." So we went. I learned from Davis later that they had caught fish the afternoon before, and that Jim had told him after each had landed 4 that they ought to quit and go home because they had enough for the family, feed the family for 1 meal and freeze the rest and have another nice meal. Davis was very disappointed, but he listened to his father, and that was a good lesson in sportsmanship. The next afternoon, Jim and I went, and Jim in the front of the boat, as he usually was, told me to paddle over to this. We paddled over to the cove, got out our fly rods, had 2 6-packs of beer. We sat there, the sun at our backs, flipping the fly rod, the crickets, and we slayed. We had caught about 15 fish apiece, and I said, "Well, Jim, don't you think we ought to quit?" He said, "Oh no," he said, "I'm having too much fun, and besides that, I've got 2 more beers to drink." When Jim would drink a beer, he was very meticulous about disposing of the can. I mean, rather than leave it at the bottom of the boat or throw it up on the bank, he always carefully filled it with water and sank it. Well, we cleaned out the hole that afternoon, and there are a lot of lessons in that little vignette. Teaching your son sportsmanship and other things that I won't comment on. There was one problem. Dr. Marvelous, we fished out there a fair amount, but Dr. Marvelous subsequently drained his lake, and he saw all these deer. So we didn't get invited out there too much more. The third story is Jim, the lawyer, and this really did happen. One of my first cases at the firm, one of my first cases at the firm was a condemnation case. Jim insisted on sitting at my elbow, as indeed he should have. Judge Phillips, the legendary judge, was the trial judge in the case, and the Attorney General sent an assistant Attorney General down from Raleigh to try the case. We tried the case, and I made what I thought was a good argument for the jury. The land abutted Highway 74 between Rockingham and Hamlet, and it was in a commercial area and so on. The judge, bless his heart, in stating the contentions of the parties, really did a number on the Attorney General. He said, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the owner contends that this land abuts a major arterial highway stretching from the mountains to the coast. And he went on and on. And in stating the contentions of the Attorney General, he said in a complete monotone, state contends this, the state contends that. It's on the record, looked pretty good, as lawyers will appreciate, but the jury knew what the judge had in mind. The verdict came in, and it was for substantially more than the amount asked for in the complaint, substantially more. The Attorney General's eyes were rolling back in his head. He was kind of dazed. And Jim whispered in my ear, he said, make a motion to amend the prayer for relief to conform to the verdict, not pro tunc. And I said, well, what the hell does that mean? He said, just go on and make it. So I made it. The judge said, granted, dismissed the jury, and the Attorney General was in a state of shock. He went back to Raleigh, completely dazed and completely unbelieving of what had happened to him in Rockingham. In a couple of months, we went down to Florida again with the judge. The judge, before dinner, went back, everything was kind of out though, went back and was shaving with his Norelco razor. And he said, Robbie, he said, come over here. He said, feel that. He said, it's just as smooth as a baby's behind. And as we were going into dinner, Jim said, if that son of a bitch from Raleigh had seen you doing that to the judge, he would move for a mistrial. I will say that over the years, that Jim has gotten more and more like the judge. I was coming to Raleigh recently to go to a meeting downtown and was talking to Jim, and I said, well, Jim, I presume that the best way to get downtown from RDU is to take I-40. And he said, oh no. He said, you come in on Wade Avenue. And I said, well, okay, Judge. I said, but the sign on the highway does say downtown on I-40. He called me just a couple of hours later, and he said, you know, he said, I really did sound like the judge. In all seriousness, my wife admonished me to be sure and convey to you and Linda, to Dorsey and all the family, her love and her sincere regret at not being here. We have a grandson that is to be born next week. There were 2 false alarms this week, and she's at home waiting to go to Wilmington to help our son and his wife. In thinking about this occasion, I was thinking that when we honor Jim Blount, a person like Jim Blount, we really honor ourselves. We recognize in him many virtues. He's a splendid, careful lawyer with a finely tuned legal judgment. He is the soul of integrity. He walks and believes and practices professionalism and courtesy both in and out of the court. He has a wonderful sense of humor, a keen ear for a good story. I count it one of my treasures that he's been my friend for these 40 years, and I congratulate you on honoring him in this wonderful way. Thank you for letting me be a part of it.
In order to get Jim to agree to come here tonight to take this abuse from everyone, we did have to promise him that he'd get some rebuttal time. So this is his time. Let's give him a big hand, our guest of honor.
With four friends like these, I've got to be the luckiest man in the world. Thank all of you for being here. I thank the Bar Association for letting me be a part of this whole occasion. As I thought about what I would say tonight, I wanted first to express my appreciation to my sister Adeline and her husband Mort for driving all the way from Potomac, Maryland today to pick up my mother and our good friend Janie Griffin in Wilson. They'll go back to Wilson tonight and back to Potomac tomorrow, so they're here for just this one occasion. To my son Davis and his wife Joy, to Charles, to Bob and Sharon, all of them for being here, to Chip, Swinney, who has got to be back in Rockingham for a meeting at the Burlington Industries at 5 o'clock in the morning. To all of them for coming here, I am deeply appreciative. I am particularly appreciative to Robin and to the four speakers. Robin came from Charlotte for this occasion, as he has always come whenever I've needed him anywhere. I could tell a world of stories about Robin. One, I think, is classic. However, Robin, when he was on the faculty at Chapel Hill in the law school, came to Rockingham to work with us one summer. And we gave him a case before Justice of the Peace. Justice of the Peace was the old, what is now the magistrate, limited jurisdiction, most often was not a lawyer. The particular one, Judge Yates in Rockingham, was not a lawyer. Robin took a collection case to him and came back just beaming that he had won the case, and it was his first trial of any kind before Judge John Yates. I saw Judge Yates later on in the week, and I asked him, I said, Judge, how did young Robin Henson do when he came before you? He said, well, he did a very nice job, but said, you know, said, I let young lawyers win their first case when they come before me, regardless of what the facts are. So that was Robin's first case, and that is indeed a true story. To Barton Davidian, my particular appreciation, because not being a lawyer, he is not accustomed to public speaking. When Al Purrington called him and asked him if he would do this, Barton told me that Al had called him. I said, well, are you going to do it? He said, it's going to give me a bad case of diarrhea, but because it's you, I'll do it. I asked him tonight, and he said it came true. Sammy Thompson has established from time to time, and again tonight, a prediction that was made of him has come true. We were trying a case, a medical malpractice case that Sarah Brown, who's here, will remember particularly, went on for 4 weeks, and as we had a tendency to do, and it was not all my doing, there was a very attractive young lady on the front row of the jury. And Sammy had tried the case to her, I tried the case to her. We were really, it made the trial much more pleasant to have her there. We wound up with a hung jury. It was hung 10-2 in our favor, but it was nevertheless a hung jury, so there was no verdict. The judge told the jury that he had been admonishing them that they could not discuss the case with anyone, but now that the case was over, if they wanted to, they could talk to anybody about it. So this young lady came down, we were talking with her, and she said, Mr. Thompson, you're going to be a very good lawyer. Well, it devastated Sammy because he thought he already was. was then a very good lawyer, and now he is an exceptionally good lawyer. And Jerry Albus, I was going to tell the very story that he told about the night he and Bob Clay tried to kill me in the hospital. I was going to tell the story, and I was telling Linda I was going to relate the story, and Linda said, well, you know, because of the delicacy of the surgery, why don't you just say you were in there for an operation? So that's when I was there. I was there for an operation. While I was there, when I got back to the office, I found that I was very badly behind. And indeed, they came in, I was supposed to be discharged. That was the days when you could stay there as long as the doctor thought you ought to stay there, rather than how long the insurance company said you were supposed to stay there. So he was leaving me there 4 or 5 days. But on a Sunday, I was supposed to be discharged, and Jerry came in. It was a clear, beautiful night. Bob Clay dressed, as all of you know, impeccably, as he would always be. Jerry with this big old hunting coat on. Hunting coat had pockets inside, pockets outside, pockets, but it had more pockets than it had coat. And he opens it up, and here's a fifth of gin, orange juice, tonic water, a bottle opener for the tonic, lemons, and a knife to cut the lemons with. The only thing we didn't have was ice. So we called the nurse and told her my throat had gotten awfully dry and we needed a big bowl of ice. Before they left, we had finished that fifth of gin, almost all of the orange juice and tonic water. And the next morning I hemorrhaged, and instead of going home on Sunday, I had to stay till Tuesday. I continued to feel that it was a conspiracy between Clay and Albus to get rid of a defense competitor. I could go on with stories about our speakers. I could go on sharing stories of our profession all night. But I would like to reserve that for another time when we can have a glass of wine and on a smaller occasion talk about those things. What I'd like to do for just a few brief minutes is to talk about some thoughts I have about our profession, thoughts that have been gathered over some 45 years of practicing as a general practitioner in our profession. My first thought is that I'm standing here tonight looking out at this group of lawyers and your wives, your husbands, your dates. I have never been more proud to be a member of the legal profession. Certainly it is true that in recent years we have gotten an awful lot of criticism, some of it deserved, in large part not deserved. However, the fact that each of you is here tonight attests to one thing, that is that we are conscious of the people around us and we are conscious of our community, and the fact that you are here spending your time and money to make it possible for more law students to go to school, people who could not afford to get a legal education, speaks worlds about what you're doing and what our profession is doing. This is but one example of the commitment that all of us make on a day-to-day basis to improve our community and our society by being attentive to the needs of others. Surely there are few, every profession has its few, who will and have in the past reached the trust that we have given to them. But for everyone who does, there are scores and scores of more people who practice law honorably and professionally with integrity, and I know this to be a fact from my own personal experience. While there has been within relatively recent years a decline in the professionalism with which many of our colleagues approach their practice, and a decline in the civility with which we treat each other, I am convinced that the pendulum is swinging in the other direction. We should be encouraged by the fact that our law schools are now emphasizing professionalism and civility, that our bar associations at every level are producing seminars and literature dealing with the problem, and these efforts are bearing fruit. Secondly, I am very proud that some 50 years or more ago, when I decided what I was going to do, that I decided to become a lawyer. Unlike Robin Henson, who I've heard many times say that he cannot remember a time when he wanted to be anything other than a lawyer. I was not sure I wanted to practice law until my 3rd year of law school. When I decided to go to law school, I was truly not sure of what I wanted to do with my life. But I was certain that a legal education would be a good background for whatever it was, and of utmost importance, it would give me a couple more years to stay in Chapel Hill. Once I entered the practice, however, there's never been any doubt. I've never looked back to second guess the decisions I made at that time. I can honestly say I've never recalled a day when I did not look forward to going to the office when I woke up in the morning. I'm sure there have been such days, but as I look back on my career now, I don't remember any of them. I have done very little except practice law. There's a reason for that. We lived in an apartment in Rockingham, and after about a year in this apartment, on one occasion, the lavatory became stopped up. Well, I had tried the plumber's friend, it wouldn't work, nothing would unclog the drain. I knew that the clog had to be in that trap down underneath the sink, underneath the lavatory. So I got in the car and I drove to the hardware store and I bought a pipe wrench. And I came back down and I sat on the floor underneath the sink. I took my pipe wrench and I opened that thing and got it off, unhooked it from the top altogether. I looked down and the trap was there. It was full of water. Obviously the water needed to be dumped somewhere because that's where the clog had to be. So sitting on the floor, I eased it out from under the sink like this, lifted it up and dumped it in the sink. Well, with that, I decided that I didn't want plumbers drawing their own deeds, preparing their own estate plans, and I didn't have any business in the plumbing business. It also occurred to me that if I had been doing something with electricity, I'd have been dead instead of having a wet left. Each of us has our own personal thoughts and reasons for why we chose the legal profession as our way of life. But now that we're in the profession, what can we do as individuals and as a group to attempt to stem the tide of this unethical and unprofessional conduct that we have talked about? First, the first thing we can do to stem the tide of this criticism is that we can conduct ourselves so that we never even appear to be involved in unethical or unprofessional conduct. In addition, we must realize that each contact we have with another person, be that person lawyer or layperson, we are in some way, for better or worse, influencing the opinion of that person about ourselves and about our profession. And in no instance is this more true than when we work with new lawyers coming into the practice. Whether we realize it or not, the way in which we approach our own practice is making an impression on someone. We are each, in the very truest sense of the word, molded and shaped by each person with whom we associate. I can only wish that each of you had had the opportunity to be associated with the people who have influenced my professional development. My first good fortune was to have a mother who didn't just drop me off at Sunday school and church, but she went with me. When I was in school, she was active in the PTA. She maintained an active interest in my total development, and who very appropriately pinned my Eagle Scout badge on my shirt. I say very appropriately because she had worked a lot harder for those 32 merit badges than I had. My first encounter with a practicing lawyer on a personal basis was with the sole practitioner with whom I began my career in Rockingham. For this man, ethics, integrity, civility, and professionalism were not something to be taught at seminars. They were a way of life. They were indeed a religion. Had my conduct been anything other than the highest, if it been anything other than totally ethical and professional, and had he found out about that conduct, I would have been somewhere else in the practice. I was well into my practice before I realized that everyone didn't have the same standards of practice that Tom Leaf did in Rockingham. Also, I recall early on one day with one of Tom's clients who, in my perspective at the time, I thought was very elderly. Now, in retrospect, she was probably in her 60s. On one occasion, I was helping this lady down the steps which led to our office. And she told me that I must have a wonderful mother, and I allowed as how she was certainly correct about that. But I inquired as to what had prompted the comment. And she said, because she had taught you how to be nice to old people. So unbeknownst to me at the time, my earliest lesson in civility had obviously come from my mother. Because isn't that what civility is all about? Learning how to be nice to other people. When Robin Henson joined our practice in 1961, he brought an added dimension to my understanding of the meaning of professionalism. Robin had been on the faculty at UNC School of Law for 3 years or so, and to practice with him was like having a living legal encyclopedia in the office. In addition, he was by nature a perfectionist, and I never will forget a day when I had finished a brief that I thought was totally acceptable on a fairly esoteric legal topic. I took the final draft into Robin and I said, how about looking this over and tell me what you think about it? I sat down across the desk from him as he started to read, and about the middle of the second page, it was obvious he had stopped reading. He put the paper down and he looked at me with a look almost of disbelief. He said, you have split an infinitive. Well, at the time, I honestly didn't know what a split infinitive was, I don't think. But for all of you in the firm who have had me look at your papers and have come back to you with a big circle around a split infinitive, is his fault, not mine. Robin was also a competitor in the finest sense of the word. On one occasion when we were playing golf with a small wager on the match, I was preparing to tee off on the first hole, and Robin very, very calmly says, Jim, he says, your swing has some built-in inconsistencies. Well, that ruined that round. And it started me on the road to totally abandoning the game because I never could find out what those inconsistencies were. In addition to practicing law together, Robin and I fished, hunted, and played golf together. We shared the conviction that if you really want to know about a person's true character, you need only to get that person in an outdoor environment in a competitive or stressful situation. You need to hunt with him, fish with him, or play golf with him. Rockingham had a division of the Middle District of Federal Court, and twice a year, the judge with his entourage would come to Rockingham to hold court for the week. On one of those sessions when we didn't have anything on his docket, one morning the judge's clerk of court called and said, Jim, the judge wants you and Robin to play golf with me and with the judge this afternoon. Well, being a judicial mandate, we didn't have any choice, so we stopped what we were doing and decided we would go play golf with the judge and the clerk. We teed off on the first hole with the judge and me standing, Robin and the clerk. At that time, the number 4 hole on the then Richmond County Country Club golf course was a long straightaway par 5 with a light rough on the left. I hooked my tee shot into that light rough, and as we approached the ball, the judge says, why don't you move that thing around so you can get it up where you can hit it? You can't hit it down there like it is. And I said, well, let me give it a try. And so I flailed away, and he was right. It dribbled about 10 yards up the road, and it was still in the rough. So the judge, federal judge that he was, walked over and said, damn it, I told you couldn't hit the thing. And he picked it up and he set it up on a tussock where I could really get to it. And so with a 5-iron, I laid it up right by the hole, parred the hole, won the hole for our team, and on a side bet with Robin, won that hole on our side bet. Well, when we got to where Judge couldn't hear it. Robin came up and said, "Damn it, you don't move the ball in the rough." I said, "Robin, I didn't move the ball." I said I was almost in contempt of court for not doing it the first time. And the second time, the judge said it up there. Robin said, "Well, I don't care who did it. Anybody that will move a ball in the rough is immoral, unethical, and unprofessional." And to the day that judge died, Robin never trusted him again. When I moved from Rockingham to Raleigh in 1970 to join the firm that was then known as Smith, Leach, Anderson, and Dorset, I was truly concerned about the adversarial environment of the practice in a large city. Ours had been a fairly leisurely practice, where most agreements were made by a telephone conversation or a handshake, most of the time with nothing in writing one way or the other. I had heard horror stories of the dog-eat-dog civil litigation practice in Charlotte and had no real idea of what to expect when I got to Raleigh. It was my great good fortune to join a firm in which the senior litigation partner was Willis Smith, Jr., and to have the opportunity to practice with him for almost 2 years before his horribly tragic death in December of 1971. Willis confirmed for me through his example that one can be a vigorous advocate and a great lawyer without being contentious, obstreperous, or underhanded. He was a person of deep religious convictions, and while he didn't flaunt those convictions, he lived his life and practiced his profession honorably and with total integrity. That man taught me a lot. No one with whom he dealt felt the need for having everything in writing. If Willis Smith told you something, you could rely on his word, for truly it was his bond. He wanted to do the very best job possible for his client, and he hated the thought of losing a case, and I never saw him lose one. But he was the epitome of a gentleman and a professional. Charlie Blanchard once said to me, "Willis Smith will nice you to death." It is absolutely true that we can be completely effective advocates, whether negotiating business contracts, arbitrating domestic problems, or litigating disputes, and still treat the members of our staff and those with whom we work on a day-to-day basis, our adversaries, our clients, and the courts with dignity and civility. And the profession is much more pleasant and much less stressful when practiced in that way. The lawyers whom I have mentioned who have had a particular influence on my life are not exceptions to the rule that the large majority of lawyers with whom I have come into contact over the years have been in every respect honorable professionals. I can count on one hand the lawyers with whom I have dealt who, for whatever reason, I did not personally like, and on the same hand the lawyers, for whatever reason, I could find that I could not trust completely. Fortunately, these few less than professional lawyers are exceptions to the rule. Unfortunately, it is these few who give to the public the perception that the whole profession is not to be trusted. The very fact that each of you is here tonight attests to the fact that I am preaching to the choir. But if I can leave with you any worthwhile thought is to challenge you to practice your profession in such a way that when others, be they lawyers or laypersons, deal with you, they will know that one can be a lady or a gentleman and still be an advocate. That one can deal fairly and on the top of the table and still serve the best interest of his or her clients. That a lawyer's word is to be trusted, and that ours is still an honorable and a noble profession. Do this, and when you round out some 45 years of practice, you will stand and be as proud of your profession and as your fellow lawyers as I am.
Jim, I can certainly tell you we are as proud of you as you could imagine. You are a gem of the Wake County Bar, and we thank you for participating with us, and thank you for the sportsmanship of taking the abuse that you took tonight. Just a few tokens of our appreciation, and they're not in Jerry's jacket, but they're under this podium. If you will accept these things as as an indication of our appreciation for your going through this ordeal. Little gift here, you better open that later. And a plaque. And I'll read it to everyone because I know you all won't get a chance to come up and see it and shake Jim's hand. But this is presented to James D. Blount Jr. for his outstanding dedication and commitment to the lawyers and citizens of Wake County. And presented on behalf of the Wake County Bar Association, February 26, 1998. Thank you all for coming out tonight and honoring Jim Blount, and for us to have the opportunity to be honored by Jim Blount being here. I want to thank those who made this such a special occasion. Al Purrington for making it all come together. Let's give Al a real round of applause. To Bonnie Wire for introducing our speakers. To each of our speakers, Sammy Thompson, Jerry Alice, Dr. Davidian, Robin Henson. We thank all of you for making it a special occasion, and I hope you all go away from here tonight feeling like I do, proud to be a lawyer in Wake County, and proud of Jim Blount. Thank you, and good night.